Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today, we are talking with the passionate Hashem Elassad, the host of your Not Your Typical Questions podcast, Multipotentialite, and researcher. Thank you for coming on the Polycast.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Good to be here.
So it's great to have you here. I know we've talked before in the past on this like a regular call, but now I get to finally have you on the show. And let's go ahead and get started. The one thing I like to do to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Yeah, no one knows about me. I mean, let's do not too many people know about me.
Mm-hmm.
Not too many people know. Okay, I can clap with one hand.
That's cool.
Yeah, not the.
Not many people can do it.
Maybe not too. Yeah.
Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator.
It's a question to get the gears turning, to get you started anyway.
Yeah, sure. So one kind of like similar question that I get, or like, is like what misconception people have about you, which I think a lot of people think I'm an open book because I share a lot about on social media, and I'm very kind of it's somewhat easy for me to be vulnerable and all of that stuff, but I'm like, they're very important things for me to express. So yeah, that's one of the kind of like I took I kind of like changed the question a bit and answered that right.
It's perfect.
Right.
And also too, the fact that people might think you're an open book, but you might not actually be so much just because you are vulnerable, so people think you are. But I think that's also, it's interesting how that might relate to the theme of the show too. Like people who are multidisciplinary versus specialists, it's about vulnerability too in that regard. So one of the first questions I have here is, what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
I would say I was, so I'm not going to be like super strict with the timeline. So my journey has been like 40 years. And so there's a spectrum of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. I would say that initially or in the past, I was much more leaning towards the letter of the law. And now I lean a bit, I wouldn't say now I'm completely on the other side of to the spirit of the law, but I see much more, or I've moved, I guess, a bit towards this direction. I think one of the things that kind of like helped me or like moving into this direction, my experience with OCD. So somebody who has OCD or a perfectionist or what have you, they're very concerned with getting everything right and following all the rules. And through like battling my OCD, I kind of like discovered that you can't like, number one, you can't follow all the rules and you can't be like, it's just not doable. It's just we're like limited in our capability. And once, like if you try to apply all the rules, life becomes very difficult. You start, whatever system you're trying to abide by or follow, you start hating the system. So I think there's like the state of your heart is important as well. So let's say, I don't know, like one of the issues was health issues. So I tried to, make sure that there's no, all the rules that obey, so that there's no contamination, that I maintain, like I wouldn't get sick and all of that stuff. You end up like kind of like, oh, this is not doable, and kind of like I hate the system itself. Like I hate the game itself rather than like having kind of like more kind of like enjoyable kind of like piece of life, which interestingly enough kind of can backfire. So like if you have a kind of like a miserable life, then that kind of start affecting your health. So yeah, that's my how it's just fun months.
You said your journey about OCD really helped build who you are today as well. So one thing that I also noticed too is that you were mentioning a lot on your blog posts and just videos about OCD. How did your journey with that and the challenges you face, do you think has still impacted you today?
So, one thing, okay, the way I see things in life in general is that every brain comes with like a set of challenges and strengths, and they're like two sides of the same coin. So, whatever profile or brain that you have, it's the same brain that gives you the challenges and like your weaknesses and strengths are kind of like two sides of the same coin. I'm not saying that OCD is great or like, you know, it's always kind of like candy and all of that stuff, but you could think of it as the same brain that gave me kind of like lots of fear and anxiety and misery and, you know, all of that crappy stuff throughout the years is the same. It's the flip side of it is that it gave me my kind of research drive, my love of kind of like turning every single stone that I see, my part of it, my kind of like analytical bent, all of that stuff. My obsessiveness, I obsess. This is the way I did it. Like my brain is built to obsess. So I'm trying to, instead of like obsessing about stupid stuff, I'm trying to now direct it into obsessing about things that can be productive. So,
I love that.
yeah.
I definitely resonate with you when it comes to this idea of obsessing over things. And one of the questions we have later on is going down rabbit holes. As a content creator and academic researcher, what sort of things are you wanting to create in the future?
Okay, so let's start with not recent. Yeah, let's start with like what's happening now. I'm currently co-authoring a book with Kirill Gameri on language market fit. So the idea is that when a company is targeting an audience, they might use language or words that doesn't necessarily resonate or is understood by the audience. So they have the product, the product solves exactly what the customer needs, but because of you know, miscommunication, they end up on missing opportunity. So and how we get to do like this language market fit is by, you know, customer interviews, product reviews, and such. So I think for the future it'd be like I started this now, and then for the future it'd be like one to kind of like showcase how lots of the time a single word or a few words can make a huge difference. And going back to my hidden gem vision, so like I as you know, like my vision is to find hidden gems. Sometimes like what's holding hidden gems from shining is that the language that is used is not appropriate. So I have something that's very important to you, Dustin, but because I'm kind of like communicating it in a way that's not understandable to you, we're missing out on this opportunity. So this is one thing. So let's talk about the methodology. I found that I'm kind of like very drawn to the method of research of case study. If we're like talking about a subject, then my kind of like way of writing, researching, storing it is to bring different a list of like case studies that apply to this specific phenomenon. So, for example, I wrote an article called 15 public I was wrong admissions by intellectual thought leaders and science. So what's the idea? I'm very interested in the question of how do people change their mind. This is one of the questions that I've grappled with in my entire life, specifically in an intellectual academic setting. So I thought to say maybe and this kind of value of intellectual honesty is very prominent or very respected in academia and the science and in general. But when it comes to like examine the actual, how often does it happen? How when do, it's much. I think it's much rarer than the ideal. So it's not often the case that people like academics or scientists like would announce like, well, you know what, I messed up completely on this topic, blah blah blah. So I thought a good idea would be to kind of like showcase and collect cases from psychology, philosophy, journalism
Yeah.
of intellectuals who did this. So yeah, so my for the future, it's done now. I mean, I can still add a few pieces, but for the future, I'd like to kind of like find or like publish it on a wide scale, like Huffington Post, something along these lines. So that's one of the other things that I'm kind of like hoping to do more and more. So number one is to get more into the topic itself, which is like how do people change their minds and admitting mistakes. And the second aspect of it is this is the what, and then the second aspect of it is the how. I'd like to kind of like devise a methodology of having quick access, not quick access, the ability to kind of like retrieve case studies or find case studies for whatever it is that you're looking for, which will be super useful in content marketing.
It can be useful in a lot of different areas. Hashem, I think that's great. I'm sure you're familiar with Simon Sinek's Start With Why, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were mentioning the how and the why, that kind of made me think about that. You could why, how, what, the whole purpose behind being vulnerable enough to say I'm wrong or say I
Right.
didn't do right. And this also could work even in personal relationships too. People don't admit that they're wrong in cases. I remember there's times when I went down to the karaoke place and sang and got into a disagreement with somebody. And I remember being that person saying like, oh wait, no, I was wrong. I bumped into you. I'm sorry. And it ended up making that connection way stronger. But then in business or content marketing areas too, in science especially, I can see that effect being way more profound.
Yeah, 100%. I think, like speaking in like relationship wise, it's one of the strongest ways to disarm people, and like to like one of the best ways for like a healthy relationship. So I'm thinking personally, like I'm thinking two things on the personal level and the so on a personal level when I'm interacting with someone or getting to know someone, one of the biggest things that I'm looking for is that how do they talk about people that they were in a relationship with? Like let's say like in a dating context. If I find like that a person is kind of like dissing everything that her ex did, or you get like a very like, oh, my ex was 100% evil and I was completely correct and I was completely right and all of that stuff. It's a huge, gigantic like red flag for me. So it's always something that I'm like, same with like business, like if you're talking about like your previous business partners. So if it's something I'm always like evaluating when like, or like thinking of the idea, the ability to kind of like see your limitations as well. So yeah.
Get past the ego. And one thing it's reminded me of is people know you for something based off of very small data. So when I was teaching a class back in the day, I was known for being a couple minutes late for a time. I don't know why that, because I've always been a very prompt person, but I don't know why for some reason I just wasn't very quick. And I think this relates very greatly because what I ended up learning was, I don't remember where I learned this, but basically people have this opinion of you based off the last 10 times that they've experienced that with you. And so if
Right.
you were to do the opposite for the next 10 times, then their opinion of you is going to change. Oh no, he's prompt. And when you are being negative about a previous relationship or previous business, that context is what you're known for over the course of time. People are going to know you for being that negative person versus if you do what you're saying, Hashem, to be able to be a little bit more positive and not talk about people in a negative light, and being able to admit, like, I was wrong, I wasn't a good fit for this company, that kind of thing, or maybe my last relationship failed because I wasn't able to communicate or something like that.
Right.
Being able to admit that fault, they're going to know you as that kind of person too.
Right. Yeah, and on even like on that kind of relationship, personal bit, and then the side of it for like the academic. One of the cases that this is actually by chance is one of the cases that I'm also to mention is actually about the generalism specialism bit. So one of the cases is Malcom Gladwell. You know what? You're the one. Oh, very interesting. You're the one who told me about this. This is my sure chance. Oh my goodness. So Malcom Gladwell. One of the people who kind of like admitted that they were mistaken in public was Malcom Gladwell. He started with the position that the way to go is specialism, and then through his interaction with the author of Range, David Epstein, he switched his mind. And one of the concepts that he mentioned is love. He says that whenever somebody kind of like disagrees with him, he engages in something called love bombing, which is instead of like trying to convince the other person that you're wrong, you kind of like try to give them like the best of the doubt and all of that stuff. So this kind of like disarms them. And it sounds like he started with this just like as a tactic type of thing, but it actually worked. Like he actually kind of like made them change his mind on the topic. So yeah, thank you, Dustin. Now I was like this is one of my favorite cases.
Well, and I definitely remember seeing that in some of your posts and notes and stuff like that. Not only that, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm glad I could bring that up to you when it came to the 10,000 Hours with David Epstein. Turns out like they're running buddies, which is how they like became friends, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, it started off just by critiquing the relationship started because David Epstein critiqued Malcom Gladwell, and then I don't know who suggested like let's go talking in now the running buddies. Yeah.
Well, I definitely remember watching a discussion between both of them, and Malcom Gladwell still stands by some of the 10,000 Hours. This maybe not so much specialism. So it's one of the things where he talks to David, and David talks to him, and they kind of go back and forth. And it's a very mutually respecting conversation, despite the fact they still have some different interests. He did change Gladwell's opinion, but he still has his own too. And so seeing that dynamic, that dichotomy is so fascinating to watch. I'll have to find that video again and share it in this episode at the bottom.
Honestly, it's heartwarming. Like it's,
yeah.
This is one of the things that, like, speaking about one of the things that the way that I see the word in its paradox. I'm fascinated by paradoxes. And one of the paradoxes that I found that I have is that I'm someone who loves debate, but at the same time I am super non-confrontational and I don't like conflict at all. So one of my kind of like biggest my cases where I thrive and I just like heartwarming for me is cases where people can debate. They would debate each other, but in a civil, friendly, kind of like joyful way. So this is kind of like their interaction is heartwarming really.
I think podcasting is a great way for that too. I don't generally debate my guests on the show. I think I have once or twice about a certain topic where I'm like, I don't quite agree with that. Here's why, and that kind of thing. But so I don't really debate much, but you do get that same synergy when you have a conversation like this on a podcast.
Yeah. And there are like specific like forums that, when you go like you watch this podcast forum, I'm going, this is a debate and it's going to be probably, there's a good chance it's going to be like civil and informative and like friendly. Like Intelligence Squared is one of the, like I'm a big fan of Intelligence Squared because it's all of like, it's both like, debating, but at the same time, it's like.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah.
Before we get to the next question, I want to mention I do have plans for sequel series. This main interview series is obviously the first one. It's my main podcast series that I do, but then I have started my returning guests. So the round 2 polycast, where I have people on after a year or two and we see how they've changed. But then I wanted to do a really cool idea, more, I guess, Socratic style or Delphi method, where I bring on 2 or 3 guests at the same time and I host a multi-person podcast, which I know people do a lot, but with this type of audience and these type of guests where everyone's multidisciplinary, I think that's going to be really interesting how that dynamic will change.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I'd like to see something like that.
Speaking of podcasts, on your show, Not Your Typical Questions, you talk to a lot of multidisciplinary people as well. Have any responses stood out to you?
Yeah, let's think of who were the. Let's start with the self-identified kind of multidisciplinarian, so people in the multipotentialite movement. So Patty, of course, the big octopus. So yeah, Patty, my one of the things that stood out for me is his answer to the one of the things that I've given a lot of crap about is the word nonlinear. He uses it a lot.
A lot.
He loves it. It's favorite thing. So I was asking, like, when is the first time that you came across the word nonlinear? And his answer was interesting. Like, I can't remember when I was the first time I came across the word nonlinear. Though, like, he remembers when he came across the word multipotentialite.
Emily Watnick.
Yeah.
That's what he said, yeah.
And his reasoning is that because the word nonlinear is very, like, integral to his being and very kind of like came as an accumulation over the years and very central to the way he thinks, that's why he doesn't remember. There's no, like, single one instance where you pinpoint why something more external, like multipotentialite. So I thought it was an interesting answer.
Yeah, Hashem, whenever I was rewatching the interview you had with him, I know you have 2 of them on your channel and you even have one on his channel too. It's one of those things where I remember you guys talking about that, and it's definitely interesting when it comes to the words multipotentialite and nonlinear, because I came across them around the same time that I met Perry, and thinks it's very Perry of him to attach to that, and I'm glad that he introduced us together as well. That's amazing. Speaking of which, this leads into the next question really perfectly. Now, the Optimus movement, which Perry is known for, is a very nonlinear organization, and our mutual friend, who's the one who found it. What do you think of the terms nonlinear multipotentialite as opposed to something that I might use more so, like multidisciplinary or polymath?
Yeah. Okay, let's take them one by one. I think so. The problem, the issue with polymath from the get-go is it's hard to use as a self-identifier, because you will understand that there's different levels of polymath. But the perception, I think, of the public is that a polymath is someone who's, like, super duper smart, a genius, and is like Da Vinci type of, like, knowledge. So if you're gonna use it like, "Hi, I'm a polymath," it's kind of like, "Oh, who does this guy kind of think he is?"
Yeah, so, the ego.
Yeah, it's the ego thing. So one of the kind of like the limitations of it is that it's hard to, for people to use the first understand. Multidisciplinarian and interdisciplinarian, I personally prefer that for me to use that. It has more of an academic bent to it, which is I'm thinking there would be people in the word multipotentialite and nonlinear who don't really have, like, strong academic kind of like belief, so that wouldn't be, like, useful for them. Nonlinear, I think I'd like to see more, like, rigor. Okay, I can definitely see how processes and things are nonlinear, but I'm still not really sure it's helpful to divide people into linear and non-linear. And I mean, that applies to all the people. Like, I'm not sure if it's too much or but I guess, okay, so let me take that back. But I would say it's interesting. I'd like to see how, the different kind of like ways people are non-linear, but I'd like to see, like, I think it's lacking a bit of rigor. Like, there's a chance that people, like, it's not anybody who you like, or any quality that you like under the term non-linear, which is like, I don't know.
It would be nice if there was more data, or at the very least studies or topics, like people talking about it. Because non-linear, I see a lot more people talk about multipotentialites now, even after Emily and Perry, but not many people are talking about non-linear enough. And I would definitely like to see more about that, to seeing the differentiating factor between non-linear and linear. And one thing that me and Perry were talking about on his show, I don't think it's when he was on my show, it's when I went on his, was that he thinks that people are born nonlinear and or multipotentialites, and that you can't become one. And I think that you can, but with different training. It's more so the potential to do many different things. And everyone has that potential, but I wouldn't say everyone's a multipotentialite, because not everyone really wants to be multidisciplinary at first. They want to do one thing, then they end up doing more than one thing over the course of time. Curiosity is a skill. You can train it, but some people are just more innately curious by nature. And I think those are the kind of people who become the more nonlinear folks.
Right. Now I'm thinking, like, the word potential, like multipotential. I like that the word potential in it, because it's kind of like the opposite of polymath with the ego. Like, when you're saying, like, oh, I have the potential to become multiple things, rather than like I am multiple things.
It's very optimistic.
Yeah, without being too, like, sounding too egocentric. But I guess, okay, I think one thing. Okay, I don't want to completely diss the word nonlinear, because sometimes it's a breath of air when, like, everything that, like, you know, when they're asking the question and they're like, none of the above, none of the above, none of the above. Sometimes I feel like this in my life, or like all of the above. So perhaps this is the non-linear bit, which is like where you don't fit in the form, which is kind of like distinct from having multiple interests.
Well, and one thing I think you might find interesting, because you're a researcher, some of the guests I've talked to and peers of those guests who are more in the polymath space, because most of the people who are creating content around polymathy are very academic. They're either masters or PhDs studying polymathy as a subject. And a couple of them have shown displeasure towards the word multipotentialite, because they kind of, it's very ironic, because the same mentality people have towards jack of all trades, oh, they're jumping around, putting their hands in all different cookie jars, despite the fact that's not necessarily a bad thing. That attitude of specialists towards jack of all trades, polymath people have towards multipotentialites, which is very interesting to me. And I think they all kind of go on the scale, which we'll maybe get into it a little bit later. I sent you beforehand too, this multidisciplinary spectrum. But it's interesting how the words can have such a profound impact on certain people.
100%. And not when I this resonates with me, because I was talking to, like, an academic about I was asking, like, about what he thinks of the multipotentialite movement, and one of the things that they said is that he appreciates being a polymath and all of that stuff, but he's not a fan of the multipotentialite movement, because it kind of gives, how did he phrase it? It kind of gives the people an excuse for not kind of achieving things. And if you were, like, not doing something significant in your life, it's like, oh, well, I'm just multipotentialite. So that was it was interesting that he was saying that. And speaking of, like, terms, how can outlook and terms be? I think this is the problem with the term generalist. It's such a off-putting word. It's kind of like, for me at least, it kind of like gives you an impression that the person doesn't know what he's talking about. While you think of I think, if you think of it as someone who zooms in versus zooms out, then it becomes like a different thing. Or, like, I prefer breadth over depth. That's a different thing than saying I'm a generalist.
being more specific about it and definitely defining who you are. Because I think it's a slippery slope between multipotentialite and dilettante. I do think it's okay for multipotentialites to be more freeform. If they want to dabble in many different things and not pursue specialties, multi-specialties, that's okay. That's their prerogative, right? But to say that they are just learning for the sake of learning, there's a certain point where you slip into dilettantism, I guess that's a word maybe now, but being just someone who just learns and learns and learns, but does nothing with that application. You need input and output. You can't just keep taking things in and not do anything with it. I'm not saying you have to produce the cure to cancer kind of thing, but write a blog post, write about your ideas, write about what you learn, do something with the information you intake.
Right.
And in turn, you'll learn that subject better. You'll start teaching other people too, and it starts to become that cycle. And that's how you become from maybe a multipotentialite or jack of all trades up to a generalist, or what I'm actually kind of calling myself is a proto-polymath. Because calling yourself a polymath, like you said, is kind of egotistical. I want to become one. That is my goal. That's what I have identified towards, but I'm not there yet. So I'm a prototype, proto-polymath.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Well, let's get on to the next question here, because I know we'll keep going down a rabbit hole
Right.
there. Speaking of rabbit holes, actually, on your Pick My Brain profile, shout out to Maxine, you call yourself a rabbit because of that vast, voracious rabbit holes that you go down so often. I definitely understand that. What made you describe it like that?
One part of what made me describe it like that is I was thinking of a way to. So there's a few elements for that. Number one, I was trying to find my true essence. Like, what am I? You know, the concept of flow, where you lose sense of time and I was
the optimal state of focus.
Right. So I was thinking, when does that happen to me? And so and one of the manifestations of it for me is that when I on my computer looking for something, I find it hard to kind of pull myself away from it. So I'm kind of immersed in this. So it's just kind of this brute, not brute, but very strong desire to uncover things and just keep connecting. So I thought it would be a good idea to identify with where I am kind of find it hard for me to stop. Again, very, very obsessive. So I thought, okay, this is while I'm searching, this is one thing. Another thing, going back to the flip paradox, which is everything has its advantages and disadvantages. Lots of when I'm sharing things with other people, lots of feedback I get is where did you get that from? Wow, wow, how did you get that from? So my it's because I was why do I get these things? Because I go a lot in the rabbit hole such thing. So that's one side of it, and the other side of it is that I was trying to think of a way to represent myself that would be easy to remember. And one of the easiest ways is an animal. So I was okay. So one time I identified as a penguin. Penguin and the penguin, I called it, because it's somebody who's in paradox. And the penguin dives in and get the fish. But I thought the rabbit hole is already a term that people use. So I thought let's go with that. Thought a bit about squirrel. But yeah, I think it's people are more familiar with rabbit.
Well, this definitely aligns with your whole gym finding moniker, and I definitely aligned with that. When I saw your Pick My Brain profile in particular, it's very similar to your LinkedIn too, but both of them, it made me think about how to brand yourself. That's something I've talked to a lot of people about on the show, let alone myself, and we'll get to that in a little bit. but I love going down rabbit holes, and I never really fully put together that I go into flow when I'm doing these rabbit holes. So, for example, with exercise, doing too many push-ups, not too many, like doing a lots of push-ups has gotten me into flow because I was good at that skill, but I was reaching for a higher goal. The challenge was higher, which is how I got into that Goldilocks zone. Video games, same way. The challenge is good. I have the skill level, getting into that flow. But the people don't realize the challenge of researching something or trying to find out something. And so actually, this is perfect. The thing I sent you beforehand yesterday, the multidisciplinary spectrum finale post that I had shared, that post came about because I made a mini series about all the different words: jack of all trades, generalist, polymath, gentleman scholar, whatever word I could find. And what's really interesting is that I actually went on a rampage down multiple rabbit holes. Each one of those were their own rabbit holes, and I had them all open at the same time for some reason. And what I do is I go on Google, Bing, and even sometimes Yahoo, and I'll open up the search, the news, maybe, and then images and videos for all three search engines. So I have 6 tabs open for different for that same search query. And that way I can see different results per viewing. So sometimes there'll be videos that don't show up in the search query, so I can find them there. Same with images. I have found some great resources through the images tab. And every once in a blue moon, I'll get a gem in the news tab, which is why I sometimes check it too. But it's interesting how that variety has gotten me down that path. And I have so many links in that series because of that rabbit hole.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. You wanted to, I think you were like, I was spitting a question, but go ahead.
No, feel free. Go.
I'm not really asking because one of the questions was about, or one of the questions was about, do you have any advice on branding? So I thought we would go.
Well, that's actually where I was going to go to next. It's perfect. Because building off of that, the path to polymathy, I think, the path to polymathy, I think, really comes down to being able to complete things and potentially completing those potentials if you're a multipotentialite, for example, or being a generalist and completing more and more tasks. But wait, that's the wrong question. Never mind. Hold on. So building off of that, though, something that I've even faced, and I can tell that you have probably faced it at some point, I've talked to a lot of people about it, is building this jack of all trades generalist personal brand. And how do you define yourself? How do you explain it to others? Because you have to find a word or some kind of definition that people can work off of to understand you more. But then that kind of narrows you down, which is essentially the opposite of what we're known for. So how do you think we could challenge that?
Right. I think one of the most important things to think. So while I was kind of researching the kind of the pros and cons of being, breadth versus depth, I think generalism, or again, bad word, but let's go with it, has a PR problem. So not PR problem. Okay, here's what I'm gonna say. I think sometimes it's useful to think of yourself as a multipotentialite, generalist, all of that stuff, and understand how all of your kind of like profile fits together. But then if you are branding yourself for a specific audience, for a specific reason, then you might want to take off, like emphasize more the bit where skill set is needed. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. Like, let's say, okay, maybe like you identify as a multipotentialite and all of that stuff, but if you are promoting yourself to people because you want people to hire you as a video editor, then it would make sense to have a video editor and kind of like tagline, and then and then choose something else that would kind of like complement that part, instead of like presenting yourself as jack of all trades.
A generalist.
So what I'm saying is differentiate between how you understand yourself and how would you present yourself. Because
it's marketing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So let me ask you, like, who do you see as your audience? Who would you like to have as your audience?
So something I was going to build off of this, and I think it helps answer your question, is that I see polymathy as my meta niche, if you will, or umbrella niche. And so all the other sub niches or subtopics that I go into are these different branches underneath it. And that's how I personally market myself. So, for example, I've taught swimming for a decade. Most people in town know me as the swim instructor or the Aquaman or water guy, right? The pool guy. And that's how I brand myself to those people. I am the
Right.
person who is the pool guy, and I niche down for that subject. But then when it comes to poly-innovator, I'm multiple different things. It's hard for people to get their hands on, but I don't think that poly-innovator is going to grow very fast, and that's okay because what's going to grow are my sub brands, and that'll in turn make the umbrella brand grow faster.
Okay. So tell me more. How do you think why the big one wouldn't go faster, but it's the top of the. Tell me more.
Polymathy is a topic that doesn't really grow very fast in general, like being multidisciplinary as well. Even I definitely noticed that with Perry's Octopus movement or the generalist.world movement as well. Those two, I think it's not world. I'll make sure the links in the description. But those two movements have grown a lot faster than mine, but that's because they were more focused on creating an organization. It was a different type of brand. Mine's a personal brand around being multidisciplinary and around all different topics I want to create. That's a very, I guess you could say, selfish area because it's what I want to share with the world. Whereas the Octopus movement and the generalist movement, those are very open. So, for example, I have the modular degree, which is something I created for other people. It's a movement around education, modular education, that can grow a lot faster. And a lot of the growth I experienced was because of that already. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Okay, perhaps maybe it's a good idea to think of like pain points. So would it be my guess is that a lot of the pain points that keeping the Octopus movement had is that they felt that they didn't belong or like the owners like didn't fit. So I think the Octopus movement gave them like, oh, finally like there's someone like me and there's like community for it. My guess is for you it's going to be more about, and correct me if I'm wrong, pain points related to learning. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say the fact that people wanted an alternative education, that was my motivation behind the DIY degree, which in turn became the modular degree. I couldn't find any university or degree system out there that could teach me what I wanted to know, so I made my own. And I needed a system to organize all that, and so I created that system for other people to use as well. That pain point of wanting a polymath education or a multipotentialite school or a generalist interdisciplinary studies. We've noticed, I don't know if other people noticed, but there's a big change in the Bachelor of Arts interdisciplinary studies across the country, in the US at least, but maybe even across the world, where there's a lot more people going in for those BAs and interdisciplinary studies because they want to do more than just one thing, but there's no way to really do that in school besides that BA. But the problem is that's not necessarily still the same thing. It's not really divergent topics. It's just kind of semi.
Right. So maybe, I don't know, maybe for the branding. So my kind of like thought process would be like, okay, think of animal. What kind of like animal resonates with you? Think of like times where like you had like intense experiences, and then how can you symbolize this in a tangible way? And think of like the domain, which is learning. Like, so you're not just a jack of all trades, just in general. You're jack of all. You're interested in being jack of all trades, and how to learn and grow as a jack of all trades. So yeah.
So I'm going to interject real quick. A couple guests ago, Johnny Racha, he said something that was very prudent to this conversation where whenever let's say you're a plumber, right? And you can do all different kinds of things related to plumbing. You can fix sinks, you can fix the pipes, you can redo a house. You have a lot of different skills when it comes to the subject of plumbing. But the way you advertise that versus the guy, let's say, okay, you can fix garbage disposals in the sink. But this other guy markets himself as the garbage disposal guy. Like he is the best guy or girl for this job. And you say, I can do anything related to plumbing. when people are looking at those two options, oh, this guy can do anything related to plumbing, but this guy's the best one at that. I only have this one problem. Let me hire him for that because he's very much more specific in his marketing. Maybe not in his skill set, but in his marketing.
Right.
Versus if you were to change the marketing as a jack of all trades person, like, hey, you can do multiple ads. Nothing's stopping you from doing multiple ads for different issues.
Right.
Let's say you make a really great ad for that garbage disposal. They hire you for that. And then you could be like, well, I noticed your pipes are leaking. I can fix that too. I'm actually good at multiple different things. Once you got that foot in the door, then the marketing is what kind of serves you.
Yeah, that you said it. You the other guy said it better than me.
Yeah.
Right.
So something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you? We've talked about it a lot, so I'm curious.
So I kind of thought about this, and then my thought process was okay, eventually the first thing that comes to mind, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was who is someone that I really kind of admire and look up to, who would kind of qualify as a polymath, and I couldn't find anyone. It's this issue of there were many polymaths in the past, but because the sciences were and the field of knowledge were limited, but now it's harder to pull off. So yeah, I don't really have any kind of more insight on this. It's just for me, a polymath is somebody who has, well, I would say, add to the body of knowledge for multiple disciplines. So you're not just adding to biology. So biology students know you as somebody who added to the body of knowledge, but also in, I don't know,
Art or something like that.
Psychology, that would be my take on it.
I feel like that's a very academic answer, but I like it. And
Right.
I've heard actually similar answers to from other academics. And what's interesting is that people often compare or even visualize the polymath as the Renaissance person. And
Right.
they're very similar in nature when it comes to words. The Renaissance person, and one thing I want to mention too is that the Renaissance isn't just in Italy. There was obviously the Arabian Renaissance, there was a Chinese Renaissance, there was Renaissances all over the place, and people don't always realize that.
Right.
And there was polymaths in all those different places as well. And I want to learn more about that in a future rabbit hole, but I digress. Being a polymath isn't necessarily knowing everything, especially nowadays in the modern world. I think our context needs to change for it a little bit, because when someone thinks polymath, they think Da Vinci, obviously, and he's like a universalist polymath. He's definitely an extreme example. He had 15 different disciplines. It was ridiculous.
Right.
Ocular science, laser physics, how wind moves. It's crazy. But he's not necessarily a great example. There's other people out there, and that's why I have this show actually too, is to help show people that they're way more polymathic than they might not realize. I've had people on the show who've never heard of the word polymath, but then if you look at their skill set, if you look at their history, they have that polymathic lifestyle. They have 2 or 3 disciplines at this point in their life. They're only 30 or 40. They have another 60 years ahead of them to get even more disciplines or even more specialized in the ones they have already.
Right.
That perfect example of a modern equivalent. But it's not about knowing everything. It's about, like you said, contributing into multiple different disciplines, maybe 3 to 4, or knowing those areas very heavily.
Right.
So how have you managed your interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary life?
I think I'm not content. Definitely, I'm not content with the way I managed it, and I always had an issue. I wonder if this relates to being the all of that stuff. I'm reluctant to identify as a multipotentialite. That's why I said. But
That's a good topic for this.
I'm reluctant. I'm reluctant because not because I think there's anything wrong with it. It's or it's not that I don't see myself fitting this, but I'm afraid that, when I say I am this, I think I'd like to think I'm as opposed to other people who are not this.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So if I say, oh, I am a basketball player, right? Mm-hmm. So I think basketball is 2 times or 3 times a week. The vast majority of people do not do it, right? So I think it's meaningful in this that I'm reluctant to say I'm a multipotentialite because I'm not sure if like the number of interests that I have and the number of paths that I took is really like that much above average, or like is it just the case that most people are like me? So that's why I'm reluctant.
I would definitely say a lot of people are not like you. You're very unique, Hashem.
Thank you. But you know what I'm saying? Like we're talking about the number of interests. Is that unusual? I don't know.
I wonder too, it's a matter of self-reflection because no one knows you better than you, and understanding that when it comes, this goes back to the personal branding question too, where how can you quantify your expertise? So you have your width and then you have multiple depths. How far along those depths are you versus compare like each other? So one, for example, I've been building computers since I was 10. I would definitely consider myself an expert on computer building, even though I may not have done the most powerful rigs of all time. I know how to put together a computer regardless of the parts. Right. Same with swimming. I taught swimming for a decade. Those are 2 areas. Or content creation. I've been doing content creation for a decade. Those are 3 areas I consider myself relatively an expert in. And that's not necessarily bragging, but it's just something that I can state with a fact. But there might be other things that I know very well, but I'm only maybe a jack of all trades or generalist level of knowledge in those areas. And being able to quantify that number, which is why I created that spectrum in the first place too, but we can talk, that's a different topic. For you, what could you say is your different towers?
So I think it's interesting that the supplement by what's it called, Nick Lovegrove, on where they fit in this like that person. When I took the assessment, it says like I'm in kind of like in the middle. So I would actually agree with this. This is the way I see myself, is that I am somebody who has multiple interests. But at the same time, I don't want to be like, I want to be kind of like, I want to mix between fields, and I want to be known or like be solid in a field too. I'm taking psychology and linguistics or language. So yeah, this is the kind of like the 2 things that I'd like to mix and kind of like gain insight about. So one of the things, the speaking about kind of like what do you want to create for the future, and this is kind of like still in the sky in the pie in the sky stage. I'm very interested in what's the word I'm looking for? Stream of consciousness.
Okay.
Word association. So at any single, so here's the thing, like at any single point in your, there's the thoughts in your mind, and you can easily say a word, like like a paper wood, tree, and all of that. There's like this kind of like trace of whatever words that you can jot down. And I wonder, and there's been studies or like, clarity or whatever, I'm basing this idea on like what does this say about your psyche and all of that stuff. But I don't I don't know, I'm skeptical about, the all of that stuff. So I'd like to use the insight of psychology and language in order to kind of like make use of this, of the idea that at any single point you have a word in your mind, and people will have different kind of like collections. I don't know, I'm not making, I'm being non-linear here. Also, Patty, this is a very non-linear moment for me. But yeah, like I want to kind of like be able to say, oh, this guy is kind of like, this is the word that came out. How can we make use of it? And I think this was kind of like motivated for periods of my life where like I didn't have like kind of like much motivation to do anything. But no matter how demotivated I was always had a word in my mind. Yeah.
So there's a lot. Oh, sorry.
What got us into this rabbit hole I was trying to think? You asked me something I didn't answer at all. Where I was trying to come back. And I was
Well,
setting
that's
up.
okay.
I was setting up, but I want to get back to the question. But go ahead.
There's a lot of different ways we could take that, and ironically, there's not one way. There's not a linear way that we could take that. I can reply to that answer, and like you said, we should go back to that question and re-go over it. But it's one of those things too, where this show, we mentioned actually before the call, you said you want to do a particular question, and you had it in your mind that we're going to go through 1 through 16 or whatever we have here. And my show doesn't really do that. We jump around. I think the best podcasts actually do that, where they jump around based off your answers. If there's a question that relates to your answer, we'll jump to that one.
Right.
And it's a very non-linear way of thinking, and it generates much more better tangents and that kind of thing. It also just kept making me think about how, well, I think I lost my train of thought too. It's okay to do that, and we'll end up circling back. And that's one thing I love about the show is that sometimes we'll circle back. I kept thinking about answers you said a couple questions ago, and I was like, oh, I want to go back to that question, that kind of thing. And I don't always get to do that. That's the one thing that really sucks about the show is that sometimes there'll be certain tangents that or certain rabbit holes we can't go down because of time. And accepting that is important, I think, for people like us.
I remember.
Okay.
Okay, so your question was like, how do you manage your life as a multidisciplinary? So yeah, one bit is like I'm not happy, and I'm always like feel guilty or like feel this need to organize more. I always like I want to organize myself more. I want to organize myself more, and I wonder one of the ways is just to gain acceptance that this life is messy. I'm messy. This is why, like, one of my favorite books is Messy, the power of being, how to remain creative in a tidy-minded world. It's because it mentions all of the kind of like benefits of being messy. And one of the bits are very disciplinarian, where he said like there were certain universities, or there was like certain university where the department, they had like a meeting place, and people from different departments came. And when this was the case, when like people mingled from different departments, the kind of like it was more, it led to more like scientific breakthroughs and things like that. So one thing I'm trying to manage is to accept the messiness of it, and embrace the messiness of it. Another thing is this remarkable the secret habit. So I jot down lots of I think it's useful to kind of like jot down thoughts where like you have like the unit as a thought, and this thought can be used in many disciplines, many fields, so have your system as kind of divided into very small thoughts or questions, or so the same question, again, going back to the issue of interdisciplinary, is that I was reading this book about interdisciplinary conversation. I think this might be the book that mentioned this, is that there is something like somebody says that there's no disciplines, there's just like questions, and then you answer them from whatever aspect you want. So one way I like to think of how I deal with this is I think of my interest as in terms of questions. So what questions, like what are the questions that I'm interested in? One question is how to make learning engaging. So gamification, that's one aspect. What are the disciplines that we're going to use? So we have like one aspect is psychology. Okay, the psychology of learning. Let's understand the psychology of learning. Where do you get the data from? Well, you can get it from search engine optimization, or like what's called search listening. You want to see like how, or social listening, how people express their appreciation of a game or whatever online. This is one. So there's like this intersection of technology and psychology And then, I love languages, so maybe let's work on which is something that that's gonna do. Let's work on a word game. Like let's say, we're gonna examine people's engagement with a word game. So yeah,
It's very interesting, though. It's one thing going back to your original part of your answer, this idea of being messy. I think messiness and perfectionism kind of go not hand in hand, but opposites to each other. They're kind of that duality, where people who are messy oftentimes strive for perfection, but they also maybe not fail at it, that kind of thing. The point is, perfectionism is a struggle, and if you keep trying to work towards perfect, you're going to end up just burning out and obsessing over something that's not necessarily achievable. Perfection is also the enemy to creation, and so a lot of people have not created things. And speaking of which, we maybe talk about Da Vinci too, because he was known for that perfectionism. But one thing that helped cure my perfectionism is actually like nihilism and just this idea that sometimes it's just a matter of getting it out there. Sometimes you just have to, even if it's incomplete, you can always redo it later, a different revision, that kind of thing. But just throwing it out there, seeing what it bites, and then revising from there.
something that kind of like popped in my mind when I saw this like kind of like not competing stuff. It's just happened multidisciplinary and multi-specialized how. I'm thinking of like the Gallup 34 strength. Might be a good idea. One of the strengths is the activator. So, activator is somebody who like starts things, and then so it might be good to kind of like partner up with people who are low on this team but strong in other complementary teams in terms of finishing stuff. So achiever would be one of them.
You are the average of the people you surround yourself with.
That's one bit, but I'm thinking more like if you're working on like if there's like some sort of partnership where like, okay, I'm the guy who starts the project and you are the one who finishes the concept. So that might be like an interesting task. Like, so lots of people like look at you, Dustin, like, wow, and I admire how you kind of like how many projects you start. But I can't beat it. But this same person could be like great at like finishing these projects. So might be a good thing. Maybe partnership is a good way to happen to.
Like for example, I'm good at editing, but I don't enjoy it. I love the research phase, as you can already tell. I love doing the actual interview itself.
Yeah.
But the editing, the finishing part of it, even the marketing, and I'm good at the marketing too. I don't really enjoy that part of it. I'm good at the marketing, and I enjoy it a little bit more than the editing portion. But if I were to get an editor, which will help me finish things, then that would help accentuate that progress.
100%. This was a thing that one of the biggest. I mean, might be the biggest reason I stopped kind of like pursuing my not to questions podcast is that I just don't feel like doing the editing anymore. But not anymore. Like it's a pain in the neck. So I think like if I had an editor, if I had like somebody who would just like deal with this technical bit and I just like ask questions and talk to people and reach out to people, then I'd be in a very different place.
So there's a couple times throughout this. Sorry to interrupt there, but there was a couple times in this interview we were talking about something that reminded me of AI. I've been spending a lot of time down rabbit holes with AI, and there's a lot of AI editors. Maybe we can get into those, but I think that would help solve that issue where you could just like communicate with AI, like, "Hey, this is what I want from this interview. Can you edit it this way?" Boom, and edit it for you.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that to happen in AI. Just editing.
A question that I had skipped off earlier, but we've kind of touched on it here and there, and now we're circling it back to it, is building off of all things we've talked about. I think personally the path to polymathy comes down to completing things. Da Vinci was known for not doing so. He didn't even complete, I think, his first real project until he was in his midlife, essentially. And he actually lived his way too much of a hermit, actually, too, as well. He didn't share any of his works at all. And so there was fields of study that he founded that didn't get refounded until 500 years later. Wow. So how do you think polymathic people, like he did anatomy and all kinds of stuff. He discovered how the eye works way back then. But how do you think polymathic and multidisciplinary people could get better at completing things?
So I mentioned the whole issue of targeting. So targeted with specialists might be one.
That's a good idea.
Perhaps, and this might be going back on the different types of multipotentialite of polymath, and the serial. Have you seen a serial polymath, or is the serial disciplinary? How would you treat it?
I would say serial polymath because there's the juggling approach where you do many different things like a jack of all trades, a multipotentialite, and just build them all up over the course of your life. But then there's the serialized where you do one, 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 and it kind of just builds it.
Perhaps the juggling approach would be harder to pull off for most people. So perhaps a good way to complete stuff is to enable or promote, or I don't know what is the word promote. Have the ideal of the serial polymath in question. So because polymath wants to do more than one thing, so it's like, okay, you'll be able to do more than one thing. Just put guidelines for yourself where like you switch something else, but make sure before you switch to kind of like close the door or whatever, or put it out there. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm like, just my thought. I'm not filling out jam here, but like some.
No, it's really good because it makes me think too. One thing that I've organized my life in PolyInnovator as well is these phases. So my first phase was module education. The second one technically was all these interviews that I was doing. The next one actually has been around swimming. And while these focuses have changed, and I've been more on the scale of using 1 or 2 years each, I think if you're a serial polymath, you're kind of more decades timeline wise. But phases could be a year to 10 years, whatever it need to be.
Right.
But I've been switching between them, and I've noticed that I kind of failed at managing my time well for some of them. I focused too much on doing multiple at once versus just one, that kind of thing. You could be polymathic and still focus on just one thing, and having maybe 10% of your time focusing on a previous phase and keeping that going a little bit, 10% of your time on a future phase and preparing and sowing the seeds for it, and then the rest of your time, 80% of your time on your main phase. And it could even be 60-40 if you really wanted to do like 20-20-60. But having that balance and understanding Pareto's principle, I think will help out a lot. And one more thing is this idea of that cheese shape, where if you're more polymathic or generalist and you have one main focus, you can do the juggling approach as well. It's kind of a balance between the two approaches where you have your main focus, but you're also still doing your juggling at the same time, that T-shaped person.
Right. Another thing, like maybe like another approach would be just put kind of like more modest goals. I'm thinking of like mini goals. I don't know if you've heard of the mini goals before.
Yeah.
Where like instead of so just be more kind of like reasonable in terms of like what kind of like accomplishments to what's up.
Yeah, like it helps you snowball a lot better too.
Right. Yeah.
And I definitely understand that because I wanted to do a piece of content every day. That was like a big major goal for like at least a year, if not continuing on. And that goal, I mean, I basically do create content every day or very close to it, but it's taken me years to get to that skill. And the reason why I do it is because I have multiple different series, so my interests can switch. So when I'm bored with one thing, I can focus on the next series the next day, and it kind of keeps that momentum going because I'm not focusing on just one thing. I think that's also another tip as well, is keeping your curiosity stimulated by changing things up.
Right.
We're definitely getting into the psychology bit here, I think. And so what sort of things have you applied from your psychology degree?
So I can tell you what I don't apply from my psychology degree, which is whenever somebody like a topic someone is like, hey, what's blah 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 blah, I studied psychology. The first thing is they ask me is like, oh really, you studied psychology? Analyze me. I'm like, dude, like I just met you. So yeah, I don't know how to analyze people on the spot in 1 minute.
Maybe it's something you can practice.
Right. I this question makes me feel like it makes me feel that 4 years I studied were like a waste of time because like people are waiting for analysis and I'm like, nah, I can't do it. So yeah, one big part is the psychology of learning and memory. So memory and learning are quite with each other. And one of the biggest, as a content creator, writer, you're interested in, you want people to whatever you want to say to kind of like get in their mind, especially in like, digital fashion, not that, the bombarding lots of stuff. So one of the things is like, how can I make whatever I'm saying memorable? And one of took that in psychology, like what makes something fit. So one of the things is like the stranger the something is, changes something is, the more bizarre it is, the more it sticks to me or mind. And I'm by nature I like to kind of like write and create myself, express myself and change rate. And so that's one of the aspects that I yeah.
That's interesting too, because I've been playing the new Zelda game recently, and it just something that stuck to my mind. And once you said that, it popped up right away. Was I dropped down a hole because there's an underground area you can go into. I dropped down a hole expecting to go explore and do something. As soon as I got down, this boss appeared out of nowhere that I had no idea even was in the game, let alone this gigantic beast that's in front of me. And I was crapping my pants. I was like, what do I do in this scenario? I guess I could technically run away, but it was just such a strange moment because I did not expect it at all. Hence, reason why they probably put it there. But that memory now has stuck out with me. And this game in particular has a lot of those moments of like, that's really bizarre. That's really weird. That sticks like it's crazy. That's why it's so addicting, really. But I digress.
Right. No, that and also like as content structure, this is something that we should keep in mind. Like whatever you put in your material, that's why like I like to pick case studies that are extreme or like a touching grabbing or like this. Wow, this is a very like interesting story because this is the way people can handle it. Yeah, something else I kind of apply is the issue of one of the ways you retain something if you try to retrieve it. So let's say the studies that they did is let's say like you took notes, not notes. So one thing is I have an exam, right? So one way to do it is to memorize the stuff and then after 2 days read the exam again or like go through the things that I have to memorize. But the retention is best kind of improved instead of like going over the stuff again. You try to retain them. I'm not explaining this in the best way, but
it's spaced repetition, but you also got to change it up too.
It's spaced repetition, but the idea is that the effort, the trying to remember something, builds in the memory or helps in learning. So the actual, like when you're taking an exam, the actual act of taking an exam cements the knowledge in. So that's why it's very important to kind of like doing the act of learning or like do exercises or whatnot. It's not enough to go over the material, kind of like, okay, here's the material, I'm just reading it. So one way I apply that is that, like, let's say like I have now, if I'm preparing for like a podcast or something, while I'm driving, I'm trying to kind of like think of like the question that I have and then going over trying to answer it by myself. So yeah, this is one of the ways.
One last question here before we wrap up, because I think this is going to be kind of a doozy, is what sort of things do you think could come from the rise of AI, such as like ChatGPT?
Obviously, like the things that are easy to kind of regulate, they're not regulate, that are like very truthful or easy to kind of like replicate. They will be automated, and things that are non-linear, I guess, will be a bit harder to automate. So I'm thinking for me personally, like this is this is what I'm thinking of, is that I want to focus on things that will have a higher that will are harder, that AI or like machine learning has a hard time doing now. So an example of that is I'm using Midjourney. You're familiar with Midjourney. It's the tool that you use to create images, to input text, and then you get images. So one time I kind of like I wanted to see how it would not how I wanted the prompt was something along the lines of a mouse chasing a cat. Well, I'm very interested in these type of things, like where it's like the opposite of the normal thing. And it couldn't, like, it didn't understand, like, it kept drawing a cat chasing a mouse. So the reason for that is that it goes with, like, what's common, not what, right? So I thought maybe a good idea for me would be to focus on case studies and affiliated case studies or niches of things that are against the norm or the fringe, focusing on the fringe. So I guess I asked it instead of asking, what would come. Yeah, I think. Yeah, this is my kind of like my strategy at this point is that I would like to focus on things that are unusual on the periphery.
Yeah.
That an AI wouldn't understand or wouldn't.
There's a lot of news about like text to video now too, and some of the crazy things that have come up with AI generators, whether it's images, videos, audio, that kind of thing. I've used them all pretty much at this point, like as many tools as I possibly can. I dabbled with, and there's one that I haven't really used too much, but I've heard a lot of stories about. It's called AutoGPT, where you can install it locally on your computer, and this newer model allows you to you give it tasks to do, like, hey, or you give it goals, like, hey, I have this goal to, let's say, I need to have this software, do this software on my computer. I have this Python script, I want to run it, I don't know how to do it, please help me how to do it. It then does different steps, like, okay, it searches how to do it, it installs the node repository that you need in order to run it, it does it all for you, and then it executes the script. It does what the task you need in the first place done, and then it gives you a report at the end. This is all that I did. And I feel like that's a linear line there, but the actual process to get to that point, what do you need to do in order to get this script running, is a non-linear approach, to be honest. Like, it has to find out what to do, and it does that in a more abstract way. There's also, I nerded out a little bit at the end of last year with Midjourney and DALL-E and a couple other tools as well, where I had this idea for a Pokemon game. I wanted to elaborate on it. I used ChatGPT to flesh out my ideas, and then I used these image generators to come up with beta designs for each of the creatures. And some of them were pretty crappy, but some of them, if you give enough prompts, the right kind of prompts, it'll come up with some really unique designs. And out of 300 of them, at least 100 of them were ones that I was going to use right away. They were that amazing. The next couple hundred, I need to maybe revamp a little bit. But it's interesting how it all comes down to those prompts and how detailed or specific you get.
Yeah. And again, this might be one of the issues that I would like to work on. It's the idea of how can you, again, the intersection of language, technology, and research. How can you write prompts in a way that would be best understood by the.
Well, I have one more thing I want to pick your brain about, because we're circling back to something before we finish up here. And that is this idea of taking notes and questions. And actually, when you mentioned that, I actually wrote down an idea for myself. For the modular degree, I have all the books and courses and stuff like that. But I also had, from Maxine, ironically, this idea of categorizing conversations. You can learn from these conversations and being able to write them down and keep track of them. I think is helpful for you to learn topics in the future. But something that you mentioned is questions. What questions do I have? And keeping track of those questions and learning connecting the different ideas. Like, okay, I read this blog post and listened to this podcast because of this question, and linking those together. So kind of wanted to get your ideas on Zettelkasten and note taking and just kind of linking together different ideas.
Yeah, so I would love, I'd love to be able to pull this system off. I tried to dabble a bit with the Obsidian and Zoom and all of that stuff. Haven't been able to do it yet. And one of the kind of learning systems, have you heard of Super Memo?
Yes.
Yes. So we've talked about this before. I don't know if you checked it out.
I think I looked at it afterwards.
Yeah. So Super Memo, and I know people are like, Super Memo is addictive, and I love the theory of it, the principles behind it, and I thought this would be super duper kind of like fit with being Polymath, because you have bits and bits, and then you can connect them in different ways. But the biggest problem with this is that it's the UX is horrific. So my thought is, I really want to be doing it, but I'm not, like, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's a learning curve, maybe it just needs a lot of time. But I think, once you're able to have like a system where like you can connect your whatever thoughts that you have, it will be very hard. It's just need to kind of like, I don't know.
Get past the hump.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because my most recent rabbit hole has been Obsidian. I had tried it in the past, but didn't really care for it. And the same thing happened with Notion. I've been using Notion for the last 3 or 4 years now as a power user, just crazy databases and the expansive system that I've created. And recently, I thought about combining a local AI with a local tool. So I was actually looking at Logseq, which is kind of like Obsidian, but it was kind of clunky, kind of like what you're saying with the Super Memo. It just wasn't really quite there. I didn't like the UI. But then I remembered, oh yeah, Obsidian. I re-downloaded that, got into it. And it seems like my second try with the tool is what gets me into it. Because the first time I used Notion, I hated it. I was like, I don't like how small the database is. Well, it turns out I needed to make it full width. I needed to change some certain properties, that kind of thing. I needed to learn how the system worked better, get past that learning curve, and that helped me out a lot. And with Obsidian, I was able to move over my modular degree and my poly-innovation operating system, my Life OS, in there. And I feel like that might be helpful for you. I'm glad that you know Obsidian too. Like maybe that's kind of the bump you need to get past the hump.
Yeah. I really would love to be using this system. So I guess it's you go to the gym. I'm going to learn Obsidian. I'm going to learn the casting. But is it very casting?
Zettelkasten is like the note-taking methodology.
Yeah.
I don't really use it in the sense of what people talk about, using the unique IDs and that kind of thing. But the methodologies and the way you learn Zettelkasten, I think, still apply towards other tools and methodologies too. It's like getting things done. I never used GTD or Para in Notion, but I learned from those systems and tools and made my own kind of which I think helps with Polymathy. And I think this is a good time to wrap up here. So where can people find you online?
So I'm quite active, but I'm not as active as I was before on LinkedIn. Hashem Elassad. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. If you that's one bit. And I also have a blog, Paradoxical, and a YouTube channel for lots of questions with Hashem. Send me the links for all of those. I'd love to connect.
I got them all in the description for you.
Right. I'd love to connect with anyone. If you have any questions, would love to reach out to you soon.
That's a great call to action there. What could be a call to growth for the audience to do?
Here's the challenge. I'd like you to think of something that you did a mistake, but you didn't apologize for, think of that, reach out to someone and send them, I'm fine.
That's a great one. So once again, this is Dustin and Hashem on the Polymath Polycast. Thank you for joining me.